Welcome to this week's episode. My Polyglot Life is a podcast for language learners and teachers who like to think about how to learn and how to make education more efficient, inclusive, and connected to practical things like fitting into your daily life and in sync with our interests, especially if that includes feminism, social justice, and protecting the environment. If you're looking for content in French, I invite you to listen to the episodes of My Polyglot Life en français. But in this season, you'll also hear some episodes in English on the topic of bilingualism, Canada, and education or learning in the 21st century. I am Cathy Intro, that's a short for Introligator, yes, that's my name, a French-born language coach living in Canada. My practice integrates neuroscience research, coaching techniques, and language expertise. I am a certified neuro-language coach and also a teacher trainer for educators who want to enhance their skills and know what's behind the methods that you may use and you know it works, but you'd like to know why it works and how you can use them all the time to maintain students' engagement and support their progress. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, check out my YouTube channel and website, mypolyglotlife.com. You'd help me a lot if you could share with your friends and colleagues and also by leaving a review on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. I would also like to acknowledge that the place where I live and work in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, lies on the unceded indigenous lands of the Kenyan Kihaka Mohawk Nation, a traditional gathering place for many First Nations. As we say in French, bonne écoute, enjoy the listening. Bonjour, hello. Today's episode is available in 2 languages. L'épisode d'aujourd'hui est disponible en 2 langues. First in English and then I also recorded it in French. Si tu préfères écouter en français, patiente jusqu'à ce jeudi pour avoir la version française ou si les 2 épisodes sont déjà sortis, avance jusqu'au prochain épisode. Today is a very personal episode based on my own experience and reflections from a perspective of a highly proficient non-native speaker of English and also a neuro-language coach. Because this experience was in English, it felt more natural speaking about it in English, but for those of you who may be more comfortable in French or who want to practice your listening skills, listen to the next episode entirely in French about the same topic. So, last week, I had an important job interview in English. But since I've been living in Montreal, I'm not as immersed in the English language as I was before. I speak mostly French. And also because I teach it, I speak a mix of both languages with frequent interferences. But this interview was for an English teaching position, so I knew my English had to flow very well and be as flawless as possible, pronunciation included. So, yeah, you could say I was a bit stressed. Some people here, especially in Quebec, are born bilinguals, meaning they come from a family and a school system where the 2 languages were nurtured from a very young age. What is little known to us, who look at them with envy, is that they too often have a preferred language or a language that is stronger. For example, many can speak French very well but may not be as confident with their writing skills. But if, like me, you are not a born bilingual, what do you do when you learn the language later in life and when your life circumstances and job require you to constantly switch between languages? I mean, we're humans. Our brain strengthens what we use most and saves energy on what is less frequently used. It's hard to maintain a high proficiency in several languages, and it requires work and constant nurturing. Besides, the imposter syndrome is always lurking around the corner. That feeling that you are not legitimate. That maybe you put on a mask, but people are going to see through it. Or, that advice everyone gives you to just be yourself, everything will be fine. But what if you're struggling with self-esteem and if you think yourself is never good enough or not what the other person is looking for? Maybe you have built a strong protection and character in your native language or in English because you've been speaking it for a long time, but all your doubts come back with greater intensity when you have to express detailed and precise ideas in a stressful environment, like being judged by someone or even thinking that others are judging you, and doing that in a language you feel you don't master well enough. On top of that, the other culture may require new behaviors and social skills and not only language skills. Well, first, let me tell you that mastery, even in one's native language, is a lifelong project. There are always things you can learn or improve. I don't mean to stir up some insecurity about your native language, but your conviction that you are very proficient in your native language is more about the self-confidence you have developed through positive experiences and the amount of work you have done on and in your native language than an absolute measure of proficiency. Everyone speaks in a way that only belongs to them. Everyone expresses their thoughts in a personal way, depending on their vision of the world and the way they analyze what's going on and how to connect ideas. So, many factors come into play when it comes to judging someone's proficiency and mastery of a language. And everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. And it's the same in your second or third language. Your level of mastery depends on how much you have worked on and in the language, and your self-confidence in your ability to be articulate in this language. Now, let's get one thing out of the way. If you haven't worked enough on your language skills yet, and it takes a lot of time, then there's nothing else you can do but work more on it and in this language to improve progressively. I'm going to be a bit blunt here, but maybe some of you need to hear that. Stop complaining, stop wishing things were different, and get to work. Find what you can do to increase your engagement with the language in a way that is sustainable, because I don't want you to fall into language burnout. And do it now. And if you feel you need some help with that, check out the link in the description to find out how my coaching program Feuille de Route, Roadmap, can help you structure your French learning journey so that you get unstuck and move on to a higher level. It includes both one-on-one coaching and a self-paced video course with journaling activities to help you learn how you learn. Oh, and one last thing about imposter syndrome. Just remember that statistically, due to differences in the way we educate boys and girls in our societies, men tend to feel able to apply for a job when they consider they have at least 50% of the required skills, while women are way more insecure. Even if they meet 90% of their requirements, they still focus on those 10% they lack, and it undermines their confidence and possibly the salary they ask for, if they apply at all. If this is your case, just remember that many people get jobs even though they don't have all the skills yet. And they learn after, before starting, or on the job. And that is not because other people are native speakers that they know how to write and express themselves well or teach their native language. Now, for some practical tips to prepare for a stressful presentation or job interview in a foreign language you are proficient in, but when you struggle with self-confidence issues, keep listening. As I said in the intro, this is based on my personal experience, style, preferences, and what I know about the brain. But your strategies could be somewhat different, so I invite you to explore, experiment, and find out what works best for you. Speaking is a complex activity. I talked about this in episode 79, June 2022, Pourquoi ce qui fonctionne pour les autres ne marche pas pour toi. You have information stored in your brain that you need to retrieve. In your daily life, you can just pick the simplest option. You don't need to overcomplicate or overthink things. But when you're in a professional context, you need to impress your audience or demonstrate your skills, and the stakes are higher. Both expectations and stress rise. The problem is, stress makes a lot of information unavailable. It slows down your brain connections and blocks access to your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, and to its executive functions. You may even experience a fight, flight, or freeze response, and in that case, your second language isn't as available or as accurate. It's like going back to survival language skills at best, if you're not completely blocked and mute. But it doesn't have to be that way. Indeed, the mindset component becomes crucial in these situations. Beforehand, and I'm not talking about 2 weeks before, but as a long-term project, a constant practice to improve this skill of switching to a state of mind that blends hyperfocus and letting go. Hyperfocusing on a task and letting go of your desire to control everything. Trusting that the different parts of your brain will do their job. The thinking brain as a supervisor and the subconscious allowing you to be in the flow, to use all the information stored in your brain to nourish your speech with facts, examples, and creative insights using the best possible words you can access to at that time, even if they're not perfect in your opinion. Here are the ingredients of this mindset. First, thorough preparation. Don't think you can wing it spontaneously. You can wing it or improvise on unexpected questions if you know your topic well in general. The question may start as something that looks far from what you've prepared, but as you speak, there might be openings to connect it to something more familiar that you have prepared and the core message you want your audience to remember. In your preparation, ask the people helping you, or brainstorm yourself, to push you out of your comfort zone, to ask spontaneous questions you hadn't thought of, to practice thinking on your feet and pivoting rapidly. During my own preparation while self-interviewing, I found I tended to start rambling and get stranded in long answers, and that's when problems started to arise with the language, with being stuck, not knowing how to finish a sentence, thinking about a sentence in French and not able to find the English words because the structure didn't fit the English language. And I knew I had to watch that. However, suddenly, when there was a real person in front of me, I found it was easier to give a succinct answer, a short answer, to answer directly to the question, not to waste that interviewer's time, leaving it up to them to ask follow-up questions if they wanted me to develop something. Talking to oneself and talking to or with a real person is different, but talking to yourself can help identify your weaknesses and areas you're not comfortable with. Ingredient number 2, prepare your brain and mind by immersing in the target language in the weeks and days leading to the event. If you can't cut off the other language or languages completely, for example, my interview was in English but I work in French, select carefully what you do in your free time, when you have control over what you feed your brain with and what comes out of your mouth. In the 2 weeks before the interview, I made sure to schedule more frequent meetings with English-speaking friends, and I apologized to other friends because I knew I wouldn't be as available for a while to meet with them. To prepare on my own, I also did a lot of reading aloud to train my mouth and jaw. Having something in your mind and saying it are different things. So don't forget to train your body, the mechanics of producing and linking sounds as much as your brain. Speaking of the body, it goes without saying that sleep and appropriate food and water intake can help prevent brain fog and improve your reactivity. Which brings me to point number 3. Knowing how to calm yourself down and push away the panic, both in the moments before the event and during your speech, when you may encounter challenging moments. For me, those strategies are breathing, adopting certain postures, a confident posture, eye contact, smiling, and something as simple as hydrating well before the speech because my mouth tends to get dry with the stress and it affects my pronunciation. Coming back to point number 1, knowing I prepared thoroughly and did everything I could helps me feel more confident. It's reassuring. If I do my best, the rest isn't up to me and there's nothing I can do about it except analyze what I can do better next time. And number 4, finally, when you're in the meeting, remember to focus on the message and speak slowly. Not too slow that it becomes annoying, but when we're stressed, we have a tendency to speak faster, which makes it harder to think and affects our articulation and elocution. Our audience needs time to process what we say and maybe also to take notes. Slowing down and focusing on the message is trusting your brain that it will use the skills it has acquired to convey your thoughts. If you've prepared ahead of time and worked on your language skills regularly, you do have the skills. Then you have to work on letting go and trusting that you don't need to control everything. Let your subconscious take care of the things it knows and use your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex, to build your argumentation and help you with the tricky points you know you need to watch. In short, it boils down to this: don't wait until you need the language to work on it. If you know you need this language or you will need it at some point, set up a routine and regular practice because mastery takes time and repetition. Focus on your foundations and intensify in the weeks leading to your exam, interview, or presentation. To this day, I still don't know the result of this interview, but I feel satisfied because I have done everything I could and did my best, although it was not perfect. But I remember I'm a human being and not a robot. It's hard to stay 100% focused on all the little things you need to control, so just try to get most of them right. The rest is out of my hands, and whatever happens, I have no regrets. In conclusion, I'd like to share some observations I made in the last year. When you reach a certain level, it's amazing how fast the top-of-mind language in your brain can change, and how language priorities switch constantly depending on your needs, no matter your proficiency level. After I spent 1 month in Spain last year, Spanish became number 2 behind French, although I speak English better and it comes almost as naturally as French for me now. I'd say Spanish stayed second for maybe 1 month after I returned to Montreal, and then it has been receding ever since because I'm rarely using it in my daily life. It also goes fast the other way around. After this interview last week and the more intensive English immersion, English was tied with French at number 1, and I know that should I switch to a 100% English-speaking environment, English would become number 1, at least while I'm there. That's why linguists and teachers distinguish between native language and L1, the one you use the most. Your L1 may be different from your native language. This is easier to understand when you think about children from immigrant parents. Their native language may be, say, Spanish, but because they live in Quebec and go to daycare and school in French, their L1 would be French. But I don't have time to dig into this concept on today's episode, so let's leave it at that. As an adult, your L1 has nothing to do with your proficiency level, rather with your most pressing needs. Your brain is concerned about its survival and the possibility of social relationships. So, question for you. How can you let your brain know that French is a priority for you right now? Make a list of the signals you can send and actions you can take to make this switch in your brain. It's not going to make you fluent overnight, but it will start some processes in your brain that will help you learn and use the language faster. If you notice some mental blocks undermining your desire or ability to accept that French may be your priority language for a while, or if you don't trust that you can actually speak French, it would be helpful to address those blocks so that you're not fighting against your brain. You want the process to be smooth and pleasant. And if you feel you need some help, please feel free to contact me for individual coaching or the Feuille de Route roadmap program. To be honest, even in French, if I have to do a presentation, I will have to practice. Because the way I speak in daily life is different than what I would do in a formal interview or a presentation, especially as someone who teaches French and therefore adapts my speech so that the learner may understand me no matter what their level is. And also there are some topics I'm more used to addressing or hearing about in English. Therefore, I tend to use anglicisms or search for words when I speak in French about those topics. And this is how bilingualism works. You constantly juggle with the language filter that inhibits other languages in your brain. It requires energy and is not infallible. This is why bilingual people who can communicate with each other in both languages often develop their own language, a mix of both languages. That is more energy efficient because you just use whatever word or phrase comes more easily to you. There is less control and it feels more fluid. Whenever you have to inhibit one language, the need for control is greater and frustration often higher. The stronger one language is compared to another language, the harder it is to suppress it. I recommend reading the book The Bilingual Brain by Albert Costa. It's originally in Spanish, but it was translated in several languages such as English and French. Back to what I was saying about having to prepare to deliver a speech in French or for an interview where I know my language will be evaluated, I will need to practice to be more eloquent, more precise, and more fluid in the way I express my ideas. Especially because I know how judgmental the French can be when evaluating your language skills. Language proficiency is not fixed. It is something you constantly have to work on if you want to maintain a high level. Or you just need to accept that a language may regress and you'll need to reactivate it when the need arises. You never really forget, especially if you've reached a high intermediate level or higher, but it can get buried deep under layers of dust. That's it for today. If you're up for a challenge, remember to listen to the episode in French to check your listening comprehension or to practice. And I hope this episode was useful. Let me know in the comments or on social media, or send me an email. And if you want to receive more information about language learning, sign up to my newsletter. The link is in the description and on my website, mypolyglotlife.com. Ciao, ciao!